Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be taking a first look at a handful of the new cards coming out in the Blood and Iron expansion. Cards' latest expansion coming out November 28th, and this is going to be the first video that I'm going to do in a series of videos where I go over and give my thoughts on all of the new cards that are coming out and how they are going to impact particularly the ranked competitive scene, although I'll also, where relevant, give thoughts on draft. So, some information about the expansion. There's 87 new cards. There is one new mechanic. There's kind of two new mechanics. We'll talk about it. There is a sort of opening trailer. And then expansion highlights. This is actually quite interesting, something they haven't really done before. So there's 15 cards per major nation and 3 for minor nations. There's the shock keyword, which we'll talk about in a second. There's the balance changes and reserve pool. I've already done a video on that. You can check it out. It's the video before this one. There will be a new battlefield with new visuals, and there is bug fixes. And then before we talk about shock, let's talk about nation-specific features. So it's basically a quick overview of what the general theme is for each nation. Normally this is something that we have to kind of try to guess as we see more and more cards, but this time they're just going to tell us outright. Britain is going to gain strategic bonuses by punishing enemies for making no or wrong attacks. Additional minor theme around pinning. So that immediately sounds terrible. I'm going to just be straight up honest. That sounds really awful. Punishing the enemy for not being able to attack, while also pushing a pin theme, is pretty bad. But we'll have to see the cards. Then Germany. Germany's theme is high attack units dominate with good fight cards. Also benefits for damaging the enemy HQ. We've seen damage the enemy HQ cards in the past be quite weak. And generally speaking, in cards, it has a lot less to do with a unit's attack and more to do with a unit's abilities. Does it have blitz? Does it destroy a unit when you play it? Does it draw you cards when you play it? Just big units has never really been that effective of a theme anytime in cards, so we'll have to see. The Soviet Union, and again, Soviets are struggling by far the most. So this expansion really needs something to revitalize them. The Soviet Union will get shock units alongside iconic T-34 tanks and the fight mechanics for decisive engagements. So yeah, T-34 theme. T-34 has always been pretty much absolutely terrible. We're seeing that they're getting the Amur back, but T-34 has been bad for sort of the same reason of just throwing big units onto the board is not that effective of a strategy because there's just way better things you could be doing. So hopefully the Soviet Union is going to get some better T-34 support than they already have. Then the USA. The USA is getting the famous Sherman tanks, and a powerful 3 operation cost theme that enables efficient and precise tactical strikes. So the 3 operation cost theme is another theme that they've pushed in the past for US, and it fell quite flat. So, is it going to be able to be as powerful as it was before? And last but not least, Japan is going to be getting a lot of small shock units, which will provide tactical opportunities, while big units boast strong stats but come with downsides that benefit the enemy. The small shock units, as long as they don't have blitz and 0 operation cost, are probably going to be bad, just historically speaking. And big units that have downsides, it really depends a lot on the type of downside you're talking about. So, for example, Mikawa Regiment, a card that when you play it, it makes all other cards in your hand cost 1 more, is absolutely terrible and has never seen play. Whereas, say, the Key 85, which draws your opponent 2 cards, and draws you only 1 card, is amazing because it's a 4-cost 6/5 fighter that draws you cards. So yeah, it really depends how big the stats are and what the downsides are to see how good this is. But, that's the overall themes. We will have to get into the specific cards, and we will in a second. But first, let's talk about the shock mechanic, because a shock keyword on a card, on a unit, means that the first time that unit attacks, it will take no return damage from the defending unit. So this is exclusively when you attack with it on your turn. If the opponent kills it on your turn, well, it still has shock. Shock does nothing. If your opponent attacks it on your opponent's turn, it will keep shock, and then if the unit survives on your turn, you can now attack, and it won't take return damage the first time. And once you attack once a shock unit attacks, shock is just gone. Like, it disappears from the card. It loses the keyword. So shock is a temporary keyword, unlike something like ambush, which is a permanent thing. And you can deactivate ambush for a turn by attacking into it, but shock, very different. So shock is a very, very powerful effect that benefits having the unit on board and then being able to essentially get free damage. It turns every unit into essentially an artillery where you can attack something and not receive damage back. And that's very, very powerful. But the question is it going to be printed on good words? Oh, sorry, is it going to be printed on good cards? Because we've seen, powerful keywords be put on very, very low-statted, high-costed units, and then it doesn't matter how good the keyword is because the unit sucks. So that's kind of most artillery as a unit type. So we'll have to see, but that's all sort of the intro into this series of breakdowns of all of the cards coming out in Blood and Iron. So let's roll the intro and jump into the cards.
What a performance there by J King.
J King, full plot armor.
J King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J King is our world champion! J King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alrighty, so the first card we have here is the Panzer 4H, which is a limited German tank. It is a 7-cost, 2-operation cost, 5/5. And it says deployment, fight target enemy unit, becomes veteran if the enemy unit is destroyed. So the fight it's, as a keyword is new. It does the exact same thing as Claim the Skies does now, which means when two units fight, this is not combat. Nothing that triggers off of combat applies, and nothing, no keywords whatsoever, no abilities. Heavy armor doesn't apply, and unit types do not apply. It's just you take the two stats on the cards, and that's entirely it, and you throw them into each other, and they damage each other. That is literally it. Like, if you fight a bomber, you will take damage. It doesn't matter. If you fight something with heavy armor will not reduce the damage. Fight is just literally throw the stats at each other. So that's quite interesting. And so when you play it, you target an enemy unit, you fight it, and then it becomes veteran if the enemy unit is destroyed. So this is actually very similar to Schützen, where Schützen instead has Blitz, but if it destroys something and Schützen survives, then Schützen will become veteran. So this is quite similar in that most of the time when you play Schützen, you will play it from hand, destroy something in the front line immediately, and then Schützen will heal back to full in the veteran version. This is very much similar. You just have to have the opponent having a 5 health or lower and 4 attack or lower unit on board. So if this comes out and hits, say, a Sherman, a 4/4, this will kill it. Or even, sorry, it can be 5 attack or lower because it just needs to be destroyed. So, 4/4 or a 4/5, say a Schützen or a Winter Regiment. This comes down, it kills it, it survives on 1 health, and then it becomes a veteran, and the veteran version is a 5/5, so it heals back, it heals all of its damage. And then it has the passive, your ground units with 4 or more attack have Blitz, and this counts itself. So essentially, it gives itself Blitz. Or if you can stick it around for several turns after that, it will be also giving other things you play on your turn Blitz. So yeah, this is a very, very powerful effect at 7 cost. It's questionable how effectively you're going to be able to utilize this. Now, obviously, Reichsbank is sort of the most popular thing to be doing with Germany right now, and Reichsbank unfortunately did not get rotated. I really wish it had. So you could Reichsbank into this quite early. But honestly, like, it's not substantially better than Schützen. The benefit of compared to Schützen is this can hit units with smokescreen, this can hit units in the support line. But just getting this out really early, you're probably not going to be able to utilize its effect, because you're just not going to have the credits to utilize its effect. Also, most ground units with 4 or more attack that you're running in Germany, at least at this moment, already have Blitz. Like, it's a Schützen, and it's like the big Blitz tanks you get off of Contest Doctrine. But Contest Doctrine is also something to consider. You can get this off of Contest Doctrine now. So yeah, I think absolutely people will try around with it. And I think it might be a card that comes in and out of the meta. But it's probably not just going to be like a 3 of auto-include, just because 7 is really, really expensive. And honestly, it's probably better to think of this card as a controlling removal tool rather than as a combo piece, unless the 4 or more attack cards just get an absolute ton of things to work with. But 7 is really, really difficult to be getting up there. Next, we have Hummer Mark IV. It is a British standard, and it is a 1-cost, 1/2 tank with 1 operation cost, Fury, and Shock. So obviously this is very similar to the Hummer Mark III, I believe, which is the 1-cost, 1/3 Fury, end of sentence. So this loses 1 health in exchange for gaining Shock. This is substantially worse. So the issue with Hummer is your opponent trading it out before you get a turn to attack with it. It doesn't have Blitz. Putting Shock on this card does not help with that whatsoever, and it loses a health, which makes it even easier for your opponent to remove. So let's say your opponent starts with, like, I don't know, an Akshub or a Signal Regiment, something like that. Then you play Hummer, and now it dies to 35T, where the Hummer Mark III does not. So yeah, this is unfortunately just a really terrible unit. I mean, like, if you want to really commit to the Hummer Combined Arms theme, you could run, like, a handful of these on top of Hummer to just increase the number of total 1-cost Fury tanks in your deck. But I think that is not the best way to build Combined Arms, and Combined Arms is already far from being a particularly strong deck. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be seeing much of Hummer Mark IV unless there's some crazy Shock synergy cards out there. Now, speaking of crazy Shock synergy cards, we have a Breakout, a British 1-cost order, limited, which says, give a veteran unit Fury and Shock. Now, I've seen some people get a little confused about this. A veteran unit is a unit in veteran form, not any unit that says veteran on the keyword. So a Schutzen, when you just play it, is not a veteran unit, and you can't play Breakout on it. It has to attack and kill something and then transform into its veteran mode to then be a veteran unit. So this is quite difficult. Also, Britain already doesn't... They have some veteran units, but the best veteran units, the veteran units that people actually play, are not British. So your British ally, and then the question becomes, well, what are you really doing? Obviously, it has synergy with the previously shown German card, where you play that, you deal 5 damage to something, they fight each other, it turns into a 5/5 veteran and now has Blitz, and now you can give it Fury and Shock. But like, where are you getting all of these credits, and why are you Britain Germany or Germany Britain, and you're doing this? There's just better things you can be doing with your credits. So it's very difficult to imagine a world. It's very difficult to imagine what type of deck you want to play this in. Almost certainly a combo deck. Anytime give a unit Fury comes up, it's probably going to be best utilized in some sort of OTK where you can buff up its attack, and then it can attack twice, and it kills your opponent. The issue is it is just very difficult to see how you are getting a unit and then also turning it veteran on the same turn, and then also giving it Fury, and then also having the credits to do all of this and then attack the opponent, and you have to deal with what if they have countermeasures, what if they have guards, what if they've healed. Yeah, this is probably not going to be a particularly good card. This seems substantially worse than the Entrenched, the give a Guardian at +3 attack and Fury and Salvage, and that card sees basically no play. So I don't think this card is going to see any play either. Then we have the 57th Rifles, and oh boy, is this a good sign for Soviets. So the 57th Rifles is a 4-cost, 4/5 infantry, so already good stats, decent stats. It has a high chance of sticking. It's not amazing, but it has a high chance of sticking. 1 operation cost, already a huge improvement over a Moor. If you've ever tried to play T-34s, you know the 2 operation cost on a Moor is brutal. And then its keyword is like a Moor on steroids. So the keyword of 57th Rifles is when you deploy or add a T-34 tank of any variety, it fights a random enemy unit just immediately. It will just immediately pick a random enemy unit and they fight. Now, obviously, there's situations where this could be bad. It could just immediately kill your T-34 in a suboptimal way. But the vast majority of the time, this is just going to make your turn 5 just play T-34 a lot better, because now it's play T-34 and also it actually kills something, probably, because it's turn 5. Nothing's going to have 6 health, probably. So yeah, this is a huge card for T-34 decks. You can play this out on turn 4, and your opponent kind of has to kill it. And if they don't kill it, suddenly it makes playing a T-34 on turn 5 a viable card strategy. Also, later in the game, you can do some wild things with it. You can do like 57th Rifles Tractor Factory, and they hit 2 things. You can stack this with Amours, and you reduce the cost of your T-34s in hand, and you start playing out several of them. And it might even clear up a board space for them if they're trading into units and dying in the process. And that's going to give you the board space to continue to play more from your hand. So there's wild things you can do with this. It still is a 4-cost infantry that doesn't have guard, it doesn't heal, it doesn't have blitz, and it doesn't do anything the turn you play it unless you have, like, at least 9 credits, question mark. So it's a very powerful card in the T-34 deck. It's not supporting the T-34 deck not dying to Jagro on turn 4, because Soviets don't have Bryansk Regiment anymore. So yeah, this is a very interesting card. It's definitely, if T-34s are good enough to play, this card is going to be in it as a 2 of for sure. But T-34 still needs some help, or Soviets in more general need some amount of help. Then we have a German 2-cost standard order glide bombing. Target unit has 0 attack until your next turn. Draw a card if it is destroyed this turn. So this is most comparable to dive bombing, which is a 1-cost order, deal 1 damage, and reduce its attack to 0 until the start of your next turn. And dive bombing saw some amount of play. This doesn't deal the damage and costs 1 more, which are 2 very, very big things. The upside is it draws a card, obviously. But it is conditional on the card draw. If it just said target unit has 0 attack until your next turn, draw a card, this card would be great. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that. You have to be able to kill it, and you have to be able to kill it while spending 2 credits not damaging it. Now, it spends 2 credits reducing its attack to 0, so if you have units on board, you can trade into it, but historically speaking, these types of cards have never been particularly good, because why would you want to play a card in your deck that assumes you already have units on board that can trade into this to get a card draw, when you might just draw this instead of units, and then you don't have units on board, and then you can't draw with this because you don't have units on board, so you can't draw your units, and then this is not that good. So, like, there's a world where people maybe play this as, like, a one-of tech card in certain metas, or they try it out in certain decks, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be particularly good. Germany doesn't struggle that much with card draw, and you definitely don't want to dilute your deck with just kind of weird tech orders, unless just, like, the entire meta devolves into just these huge high attack things hitting back and forth and trading 1 for 1 with each other, and then suddenly a glide bombing lets your 7/7 kill your opponent's 7/7 for free, and you draw a card. Like, maybe that's gonna happen, but that seems so far removed from the meta we currently have, and any meta we have ever had in cards, that I can't imagine this is gonna be particularly good. Then we have a Turning Point, a 2-cost Soviet order special, which says excess attack damage from your T-34s this turn is dealt to the enemy HQ. So it's basically Ura. It's all of your T-34s at Ura. Now, it doesn't increase the attack of your T-34s like Ura did, but it does count all damage from your T-34s, which I would assume counts fight damage. So the 57th Rifles, when they're just chucking your T-34s at the enemy units, that can also be dealing excess burn damage to the enemy HQ. That doesn't account as their attack. So if you play like the Blitz T-34, or you play Turning Point, then you play the Blitz T-34, and it gets tossed into a unit by 57th, and it does the excess damage face, you then can operate it and move an attack into the face, the HQ, or you can move and trade into another unit, and the excess damage will go. It's difficult to imagine a world where excess damage going to the HQ is super important. I see this in one of 2 places. One is a combo OTK deck. So we saw Siberian Transfer come back, and I mentioned at the time in that video that, like, oh, well, unfortunately we don't have Ura, so you can't deal the excess damage. Well, you can Turning Point now instead of Ura, and if you're able to buff the attack enough, it doesn't matter. So if you can do, like, say a Siberian Transfer, Winter Warfare, counter-offensive Turning Point, and then you smack into something, and then you're dealing, like, 20 damage to the enemy HQ, that could happen. That could be an OTK deck. Without Great Patriotic War, that OTK deck seems substantially worse and not particularly worth trying, and that's a good thing, because people are going to try it, people are going to play it, it's going to be silly, and you're going to win 1 in 10 games, and that is perfectly fine. We don't need Great Patriotic War turning Soviets into just the OTK deck, or the OTK nation, as the only viable competitive thing that they can do. But in the T-34 deck in general, where you're just playing Amurs, you're playing the 57th Rifles, you're playing the T-34s, and you're just trying to play big stuff and win, I don't think you actually play this card. Just because T-34 is not a burn deck. You're not using this to, like, close out a game where your opponent's at, like, 3 health and they have a bunch of units in the front line and you turning point and then hit into a 2 health thing with your T-34 to deal the 3 last damage. That situation doesn't come up. You either, like, have the 2 or 3 T-34s on the board that your opponent can't remove and you just hit them for 15 twice in a row, or you run out of cards, or you lose board presence or run out of cards and your opponent just kills you with overwhelming board presence and they're probably at full health. This just does not fit the T-34 playstyle whatsoever. This is basically just a way of making Siberian Transfer OTK good again. Or not good again, playable again. And that seems to be it. I don't think you would want to run any copies of this card in the T-34 deck, like at most 1. If there's like some massive AoE attack buff card that like people are missing, I don't know. I just don't see a way where this is really something that you're ever going to do. Then we have Pontoon Bridge, a 2-cost USA order, limited. Give a friendly unit +1/+2 if it had 4 or more attack, set its operation cost to 0 as well. So this is if it had 4 or more attack, meaning before it gets +1/+2, set its operation cost to 0. So this applies to all Shermans and bigger stuff. Obviously, this is meant to fit into a Throp deck where you play something that is typically going to have high attack and high operation cost. So, for example, the 3-cost to 6/6 with 4 operation cost. You play that on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you play Pontoon Bridge. You turn it into a 7/8, and its operation cost gets reduced from 4 to 0 because it had 4 or more attack. And now you have a 7/8/0 operation cost infantry on the board on turn 4. That only required sinking 2 cards into it, and it can still be bounced or removed, or, yeah. It's an interesting card. I think it's probably better than Bolster in a lot of cases, just because I've actually tried to play the Throp deck in the current version of the game on ladder a few times, and it's shockingly decent. And I think you would probably take out Bolsters for Pontoon Bridges, to be completely honest, because obviously Bolster can give more stats, because it can give +4/+4 in that situation instead of the +1/+2. But the difference is Bolster costs 4, and sometimes it's really awkward to utilize that effectively, whereas Pontoon Bridge will just immediately reduce it to 0 for 2 cost, and still gives some stats on top of that, and it's also like a bit more flexible, like you could just play this on like a Sherman. Yeah, I think people, if the Throp deck exists, I think you're probably running at least a couple Pontoon Bridges, just as a way to reduce things to 0 op cost, just to make your life a little bit easier in the early game. I think this is good. This is a pretty solid card for Throp. Then we have Second Michigan. Speaking of solid cards for Throp, it is a 4-cost 6/6 infantry, 3 operation costs, so we're hitting that Throp threshold. It has Blitz, which is already good, and then it has the passive text, gain +2 credits when you operate a unit with 3 or more operation cost. And this counts itself, it's not another unit. So it's a 4-cost 6/6 Blitz infantry with 3 operation cost, but if you have the credits to attack with that, it only actually costs you 1 operation cost because it will refund you 2. You can also play this on board and then attack with something else that's already on board. Now, this is a very spicy card, and I think it's a special, so I think you probably run 2. I think you would, if it was a standard, I think you would still only run 2. And I think you probably run this, make maybe 1 or 2 of these just in case you don't have a way to reduce the operation cost of your units. And this is just sort of like a guy with a passive that's essentially like all of your Throp things operate for 1, which is good. The problem is, when you're playing the Throp deck, you want to be running cards like Land of the Free or Bolster or Pontoon Bridge that reduce the operation cost to 0, because you don't want to be spending 3 credits on things. And if you reduce the operation cost to 0, this guy stops doing anything. He's just a 4-cost 6/6 Blitz with 3 op, And why would you play a 4-cost 3-op 6/6 blitz when you can play a 3-cost 4-op 6/6 blitz? The answer is you'd rather have the 3-cost 4-op 6/6 blitz every single time unless you have to attack with this. And if you have to attack with this, that's not a great situation to be in. It's good enough that you're probably going to run this guy just in case you get into those situations. Like, it is a very powerful effect if you can't find, like, something like even a victory march for, like, the AoE op cost reduction. Another very strong card in Throp. But yeah, it's a good card that will make Throp maybe slightly more consistent, and I think you probably run it. But again, it's not the end-all be-all card that it could be. When you see gain credits on a card, you're often pretty scared, but in this case, it's not. It's very difficult to imagine a world where you can properly abuse Second Michigan. If you have 2 of them on the board at the same time, then you're actually generating credits by attacking with things with 3 operation cost. And you can just, it's a special, so it's difficult to draw both of them at once, but you could run this with like manpower and duplicate Second Michigan. Like, if you can get 3 Second Michigans on the board, suddenly you're popping off on the credit generation and you're just like chucking up potions and stuff. But yeah, that's a silly situation that's never really going to happen. But it's an interesting card. Then we have Type 4 Cheeto, a 4 it's a Cheeto. It's a 4-cost 4/5 tank, 2 operation cost, smokescreen, shock, and the passive, your units have +2 attack will they have shock. So realistically, it's a 4-cost 6/5 smokescreen, because even if you're not attacking it, even if you're not using the shock, it will still have 6 attack because it will still have shock. The opponent can't remove shock on their turn without just suppressing it, and then you've suppressed the entire passive effect. But it's essentially just like a 6/5 that can nuke a unit from space for free. Well, not for free, 2 or 4 operation cost. But yeah, it's a powerful card. Depending on how much just like suppress and removal is going around, I could see a world where you would just run this in like a Jagro deck or like a Japan midrange deck with no other shock cards. But it's unlikely just because of the amount of removal in the game, and unlike something like a Dragon Slayer where there's a much fewer ways to remove a fighter, this is a tank, it's a ground unit, it's gonna be not that difficult to kill this even through smokescreen, or it's not gonna be that difficult to just like flood the front line, and then like you can use shock to deal 6 damage to something for free, but like all of your units are like, 2 2s and 2 1s and whatnot, and then you're not getting the most value out of this. So yeah, it's a powerful card, but I'm very much unconvinced of a shock theme for Japan. So I don't think it's going to be run particularly far outside of just being a good unit to play. But what's exciting about this card is it is an elite, and this is Japan's first ever tank elite. You can look it up, I'm not lying to you. In standard and in classic mode of the rotated cards, there's never been a Japan elite that is a tank. So yeah, this is pretty cool. There's actually only one Japan tank special, and that's Type 94, TK early. Everybody knows that card, but that is the only special tank, and this is the only elite tank, so maybe it'll be good. But it's cool to see Japan finally get an elite tank. Then we have a Japan card, which will be good. It's Defeat in Detail, a 1-cost order special. Thank goodness it's a special. Your units gets +1/+1 when it damages the enemy HQ. So this is a 1-cost order that gives all of your units this effect. If Japan, like, somehow, as long as Japan can have cards in their hand, like they have a way of drawing their deck, this card is absolutely insane because it can start to snowball so hard. And it's not when they attack the enemy HQ, it's when they damage it. So this is going to work with cards that have passive effects that damage it, or trigger effects that damage it. Yeah, this card is has a very, very high potential. Now, I don't think it's like broken. I don't think this is going to make Japan like by far the best deck in the game, because it only applies to the units currently on board. It's a credit to do that, and most units that Japan runs now will only get this effect. Well, the only way they have of damaging the enemy HQ is to attack it. So it's a little bit of a win more card in that case, but you could also probably build around this card at least a little bit. And even if this is just 1 credit, give all of your units on board +1/+1, that's incredible. And it's probably going to give some of them +2/+2. And my thought process is, if you can like play this on turn 3 to give 3 different units +1/+1, that's kind of insane, because odds are your opponent at most will be able to remove 2 of them, and then it's given +4/+4 across units for 1 card. That's amazing, and now you have a unit that has +2/+2, and you have 4 credits to then play other stuff, and then your opponent has to remove that or the other stuff, and if they can't remove that, then it's getting another +1/+1. Yeah, this card is absolutely insane. We will be seeing a lot of defeat in detail for the years to come, I'm absolutely positive. Then we have Echelon. So Echelon is a 2-cost limited British order that says your units gets +1/+1 if another one of your units is attacked. This is a very interesting card. This is a very this is a thinking man's card. But what's very nice about this card is it's not a you have to think about it, it's a your opponent has to think about it. So imagine that there's just like a huge board of units, and you know there's complicated trades, you got glamour boys galore going around, there's a sexton on the board, and then you just play Echelon, and your opponent just goes from like having a very simple turn to a very, very complicated turn, because every single time you attack a unit, all other units with this effect will get +1/+1. So never the unit you're attacking gets +1/+1, but any other units on the board. Now, with all that being said, like, because the scenarios where this works, it's amazing. I don't think this is a particularly great card. Like, it's a card that has a lot of power potential. It's just Britain feels somewhat hard-pressed to utilize it, because you need several units on board. Like, realistically, you need at least 3 to get any value out of this card. Like, I know functionally you only need 2. Or even just, like, you play it on 1 unit and then play a bunch of guard units from hand on following turns or something. But it is attacked. It doesn't have anything to do with orders. So, you know, if your opponent just plays, like, a removal order, and then attacks, like, if you have 2 units and you're like, well, if they attack 1, the other gets +1/+1, and then they just, like, hammer one of them and then trade out the other, and the other gets no stat buffs, and you just did 2 credits, do nothing. And, yeah, suddenly you're just giving away card advantage. It's difficult, like, it's such a win more card, and Britain already has stats galore. Like, I find it difficult to imagine a world where Britain cares about running this and doesn't just want to play, like, another card or play a removal or play pin or whatever. But maybe. Like, also, like, you could theoretically play this in, like, an air deck, where, you know, you have, like, 3-4 cheap air units on the board relatively early on. You slam down Echelon, and then suddenly your opponent is finally able to blitz up a tank and kill one of your planes, and it gives the other 3 +1/+1. But, like, air just has better ways of, and more consistent ways of buffing stuff. Yeah, maybe, like, again, the power level on this card is very high, so I could be entirely off on this. Like, you know, maybe this ends up being one of the sleeper hits of the expansion, but I'm not a huge Echelon believer. Then let's get on to the third sort of the buff card of this expansion. It seems to be a bit of a sub-theme. We have the Air Corps Farian, a 1-cost USA standard order, which says give a friendly unit +1/+1. If you have a 5 or more unspent credits, apply this to all friendly units. So if you have 6 credits or more, and you play this, it's 1 credit, give all of your units +1/+1. And we mentioned with the Japan one, that 1 credit, give all units +1/+1 is incredibly powerful, and this is a standard. You can run 4 of them. However, you do need 6 credits, and it has to be at the start of your turn. So you have to start, if you're playing this on turn 6, you have to start that turn with units on board to give this buff, and it's kind of difficult. Now, obviously, there's, like, you can Reichsbanks into stuff. This is also just a very powerful card if you're playing a unit-based ramp deck, where, you know, you play a bunch of ramp, and then you're playing down your Glamour Boys, you're playing down your other units, you're playing down your Bombers and stuff, and then you just, like, throw out, like, a random Air Corps Farian as, like, a 1-of or a 2-of, just a way to buff your units a little bit, trade out more, be a bit more competitive on board than usual. I think that's probably the most likely area we will see this card played in, is just as, like, a 1-of or a 2-of tech card into a ramp deck. But, of course, there's always the possibility of playing this in something more like US mid-range, where it's sort of similar to something, say, like We Can Do It, where it requires units on board, and it requires a high credit count, and it is an AoE buff, but the difference is We Can Do It only costs 5. We Can Do It costs 5 credits. This only costs 1, and it's also flexible. You can play it early in the game to just give a single unit +1/+1 if it's the difference between getting a value trade or losing board. So it is a very flexible card. So you, again, could play this in Frontline. It's just 1 credit, give +1/+1 is so inefficient, and Frontline, like, so needs efficiency, that it's kind of difficult. You also don't want to run too many orders in Frontline, and you're already, like, this is decidedly worse than for Freedom, because that one draws a card and this one doesn't draw a card. So yeah, it has a lot of possibility. I think it's probably better than Echelon. I think it's more likely to see play than Echelon, but I think both of these are substantially weaker than the Japanese one. But yeah, very interesting card. Also cool to see the theme of unspent credits continuing on. I think that's an interesting one. Then we have Shock Tactics for Soviets. It is a 2-cost limited Soviet order, and it's bringing back the Choose One effect. That's an effect that we have not seen in a while. It says, choose one, give a ground unit blitz or shock. Apply both if you control a unit with 4 or more attack. This is very interesting. 2 credits, give a unit blitz and shock if it's 4 or more attack. And it doesn't even need to have 4 or more attack itself. It's just if you control any unit with 4 or more attack. But you're probably playing this on a unit with 4 or more attack, to be completely honest. Like, why would you want to blitz and shock something with less than 4 attack if you have a 4 or more attack unit on board? And that on its own is good, but again, like, these types of tech cards, these tech orders that help units on board, have historically been really, really bad in Cards, because you don't want an order that requires a unit on board for you and a unit on board for the opponent. They're usually just not that great. This one seems very powerful, so it's possible that this is one of the exceptions to that rule of sort of unit-centered orders in Cards tend to be bad. However, the more important thing I see about this card, and, like, again, this card might just see play, like, in, like, a T-34 deck as, like, a 1-of or something, as a way to give a T-34 blitz if it doesn't have blitz, or, you know, give it shock to get a value trade or whatever. I absolutely could just see play as, like, a 1-of in just a normal standard unit-centric deck. But to me, the thing that stands out about this card for the rest of time is 2 credits in Soviets to give any ground unit in the game blitz. Because let me tell you, Soviet OTK decks have been incredibly popular, and one of the biggest questions is, how do you give something blitz? And it's not easy to give things blitz in this game. They've been very, very hesitant to give consistent ways to give any unit in the game blitz, because some units in the game shouldn't have blitz. They're not designed around having blitz. They're designed around being played and then having the opponent have an opportunity to remove them. So with this 2 credits, give anything blitz, Soviet OTKs in the deck have decks in the past that have been competitive have run cards like the Ziz, which is a 4-credit 2/2 artillery pincer give something blitz. People have run that in the past, and this is just 2 credits less than that. And also it's flexible, like, it's much more flexible to be played at other points in the game. This is a card that they're going to have to think about for the next 2 years of design space. And in Classic mode, I don't know if this is the most efficient way in Classic mode with access to all cards, but with Great Patriotic War gone, this is another card that makes me very happy Great Patriotic War is gone, because otherwise we might be looking at a series of OTK Soviet decks as, like, the only way to play Soviets. Now we're probably just looking at no ways to play Soviets. Then we have the Feldherr Nalle rifles. Don't make me say that again. It is a 3-cost 4/4 special infantry for Germany, 1 operation cost. So 3 credits, 4/4, 1 operation cost infantry is already just like a vanilla unit. That's fine. Like, there's the 3-cost 4/4 vanilla US unit that just got rotated. That's already like a fine stat line. 4/4, 1 op for 3. Very, very reasonable stat line. Like, very, very solid stat line. And it has the text: gain 2 credits the first time you deploy another unit with 4 or more attack each turn. So this is kind of this is a very, very powerful effect. This is Germany getting more credit cheating. This is a very niche form of credit cheating compared to everything else they've ever had, but it is credit cheating. And what's really interesting is they stack. If you can get 2 of them on board, you will get 4 credits the first time. Well, if you stick 2 of them on board at the start of the next turn, because otherwise if you play 2 on the same turn, the first one will trigger off of the second one. But yeah, this is just a very powerful snowbally card. If there is a 4 or more attack themed German deck, this will absolutely be in it, because why would you not run just a solid form of potential credit cheating? Like, you play this on turn 3, on turn 4 you play Schützen, which would normally be all of your credits and you couldn't attack with it, but then you get 2 credits back, and then you can attack with Schützen, and then you can attack with this. Also, this like stacks with stuff like Nachschub. So the top end potential of this card, very, very crazy. I'm not like that worried about this card, because again, just 4 attack units are generally not that good. Like, there's not a huge wealth of 4 attack units. And if you are doing that, like, you will get credits back, which means you can always trade, but like, generally speaking, just slamming down like big statted meat sticks in cards, not that great. You can do this like post bank, so you can do turn 3 Reichsbank, and then on turn 4 you can like play this and an FW, and then this will give you 2 more credits, and then you can play like a sudden strike or something. But like, it's very difficult to imagine this triggering like more than twice, and like, if it triggers twice, that's very good for you, but the fact that it's limited to once per turn, which was a very reasonable thing. If this wasn't limited to once per turn, that could get scary fast. Like, you're going to get games where you get blown out by your opponent having both of these very early on in the game. Maybe they even cheated the first one out on like turn 2 with like a Nachschub. But I don't think this is going to be like the boogeyman. This doesn't seem like that powerful credit cheating to me. But again, could be entirely wrong. We could be laughing about me saying this like a year from now, when this card has to be nerfed because it's the best thing in the game, but I just can't see it. Then we have the Panzer 1 DAK, D-A-K. It is a 1 cost, 1 operation cost, 2/1 standard German tank with smokescreen, and the text gets a shock when it moves into the front line. This is not that good of a card. And it's going to dilute the pool for Blitz Doctrine, so that's nice. I mean, like, Smokescreen's an interesting effect because it makes otherwise vanilla units easier to stick. Your opponent can't just immediately get a value trade in on it. The problem is it gets shocked when it moves to the front line, so like, you play this on turn 1, and then your opponent can't play a unit in the support line, because on turn 2 you can then push this, it gets shock, and then it kills it for free. You could also repeatedly get shock if you find a way to retreat this, and then it can push again. But like, yeah, let's be honest, you play this on 1 and then it gets sickled, or you go second and you play this on 1 and then like they do cavalry to the front line, and then you play this, and then you're just eventually going to have to trade out into cavalry, and you spent 2 credits to kill something that they spent 1 credit on, and also they got an attack off, or like end an expansion off or something like that. It's just a really, really slow, weak unit. That's not going to really see play. Then we have Spring Offensive. It is a 4-cost Italian order, limited. Draw 2 cards, gain 2 credits for each unit with 4 or more attack drawn. This is a very cool card. So it can potentially refund itself. So it's draw 2 cards. It's not specifically drawing units. But for each unit with 4 or more attack drawn, this essentially pays for itself. Now, it's like almost certainly impossible to get a deck that's going to consistently draw 2. But you could probably get a deck that's fairly often draws at least 1. And 2 credits, draw 2 cards, is pretty good. It does obviously give your opponent some information about what you drew. But also just, it's card draw, and some decks would kill for just Convoy. Like 3 credits, draw 2 cards is just very solid draw option that most nations do not have access to anything anywhere near that type of draw. And yeah, they would be quite content with this card. Now, obviously, this could fit into the 4 attack theme for like Germany if you want to do this with Italian ally. I see this more of a card as just a further improving the playability of Italian ally control by further giving them options to round out things that other nations might not have access to. So we talked about Soviets losing a lot of their card draw. Well, you can do Soviet Italy and try to run some spring offensives, and this obviously has some synergy with stuff like like Naval Brigade or Korsan, these like higher attack Soviet elite units that have 4 or more attack, that you can draw into. Or you could play this in like Germany, and you'll draw like Schützens, or within Italy, the 7th Alpini, the 4/7 guard. Like, this is just a solid card that you're like fine to run a couple of in an Italian ally control deck. This isn't going to push Italian ally control. Its issue was not card draw. A handful of convoys is not going to drastically improve that. This card is not that great. It's just playable. So if Italy control is ever playable again, it will probably be running a handful of spring offensives, unless it's Britain main. And yeah, that's just neat. I kind of like this card. I'm going to try it out. This is just a fun card. You know, it's not just a simple draw card. It has some additional text to it that can make you think, that can make you theory craft. But at the end of the day, it's just another solid option that is going to further expand the playability of an ally nation. Then we have the Type 92 Ju Shokosha. I probably butchered that. It is a 1-cost, 1/2 Japanese standard tank that says gets smokescreen, gets +1 attack when it damages the enemy HQ. So the card text on this is not that good. +1 attack when it damages the enemy HQ is the same card text as the Type 94 TK early, and that card's very, very powerful, but that's because that card has Blitz and 0 operation cost. This card has 1 operation cost and smokescreen. Yeah, I don't want to say it's completely unplayable, because I could see a world in the future where Japan just wants a 1-cost tank, because it's something that, you know, you can play it, and then it's difficult for your opponent to remove because it has smokescreen, and then on the following turn, you can attack the HQ with it. Yeah, that's like, I don't know, maybe you're playing like a Blitz Doctrine deck, and you just want more Japanese tanks. But yeah, it's not that good of a card. It doesn't even have shock, which is kind of shocking, if you will, because they said that Japan was going to have a theme of like low-cost shock units. This is just kind of a low-cost bad unit, and I expect the low-cost shock units to also be bad. So yeah, Japan getting not the greatest card, but honestly, after Japan got Type 94 TK early last expansion, I don't think Japan needs any more help. Speaking of Japan not getting help, last but not least, for this video, we have Command Failure, a 3-cost limited Japanese order that says destroy target enemy unit. Destroy target unit. Can be enemy, cannot be enemy. With less attack than defense. So obviously, like the things that come to mind are Armored Train, Glamour Boys. Most guard units in this game will have more health than attack, and this can destroy them for 3 credits. But like you already have Commit the Reserves, and that's just infinitely better than this card. Like Honorable Death just got rotated, but like you also have Sendai Regiment. I don't know. It's not terrible. It's not a bad effect. It's like probably better than Amphibious Assault. And Amphibious Assault used to see play a long time ago. But yeah, it's just like a solid draft card. It's a solid low collection card. Maybe one day, if enough removal gets rotated, Japan will play like one of these as a tech card. Yeah, maybe like you run this in like some sort of Japanese unitless type deck as just extra removal. But yeah, honestly, at the end of the day, this doesn't seem that good. Maybe there's like a way to use this as a 3-credit destroy your own unit type card in some sort of OTK combo deck. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall at this point. Command Failure, really cool art, cool name, cool theme. Not that great of a card, but that brings us to the end of the cards for this video. So I just covered the first 16 or 17 or so. More than this have been revealed already. I'm very late to the party, but I'm going to try to catch up. And this should end up being around 5 videos to cover all of the cards from the upcoming expansion. And from just what we've seen already today, we've seen some pretty exciting things. The fight mechanic is less interesting to me. And also, we haven't seen that many good shock cards. But we've seen some very interesting stuff for Throp. The 4 attack theme for Germany is less interesting to me. We haven't really seen a lot of Britain. Like, Britain had some very scary words on describing what their themes were. We didn't see a lot of British cards. Jaggro got that crazy 1-cost buff. We're getting cards, like, fitting existing decks. We're getting cards pushing old decks that suck. We're getting cards that are pushing new decks. Yeah, we're getting a lot of cards, and honestly, it's fun. It's interesting. I'm excited for it. I'm excited to play it. Let me know what you think of all of the cards that we revealed today. Let me know if I missed something. Let me know if you disagree with me strongly, or you totally agree, maybe I changed your mind on a card. Let me know all of that and more down below in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next one. And I will catch all of y'all in the next one.